This is episode 502 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, a lot to talk about this week, even though we are well clear of the New Mexico legislative session. We'll start off with a piece that I wrote for National Review's Capital Matters. It discusses some of the subjects that we have talked about the legislative session. In this one, though, I make the comparison between the state of New Mexico and lottery winners, using the oil and gas largesse to, in the proxy of winning the lottery, which in many ways it is. Unfortunately, folks who have studied the impact of winning the lottery on people, it tends to not be the blessing that we would all imagine it would be. And I think this is proving out to be the case for New Mexico. Just because you suddenly win the lottery doesn't mean you know how to organize your finances or you become more responsible. And New Mexico didn't get to 50th by being good with its money and doing good policy. So I remain hopeful that we can convince, I really think, shockingly, our governor is the person with the most opportunity and the most at stake in terms of if she can do something positive, it could really cement her political legacy in New Mexico. But she's not proven herself to be interested in or capable of doing good economic policy. But I want to make sure people are aware of that piece. You can also find it at Heirs of Enchantment and Rio Grande Foundation.
Yes, and it's a very apt metaphor, the lottery. The other one, Paul, that I've talked about is the trust fund baby. And it's interesting that it is a trust fund, and a lot of times trust fund babies know they don't need to develop themselves and don't need to study that hard in college, and maybe don't need to work very hard. And that's something else that New Mexico has. And then it is interesting. At one point, Paul, I thought that the governor flat didn't care about the economics of the state, that she was going to be the in the words of Spinal Tap, she was going to go to 11 on environmental issues, just go out there and pass everything. But then she vetoed some things this time. So I'm not sure what she thinks her legacy or what she wants to do to develop for the state. It's confusing. But I read that piece, Paul, and it's very good. I encourage our listeners to do the same.
Yeah, and it's something that we hope that the powers that be will take to heart. And so moving on, because we do have so much going on, the U.S. News and World Report, speaking of things that we could improve by enacting better public policy, especially economically, U.S. World Report has a best states. We're ranked 47th overall. And especially when you have kind of vague titles like best states. What does best states mean? Their variables are eminently sensible. Normally 47th is pretty much where we find New Mexico. So that by itself leads me, directly to believe that there's some credibility to be had there. We're looking at crime and corrections, education, healthcare, natural environments, economy, fiscal stability, infrastructure, and opportunity. 47th on the crime issue rings true. 50th in education rings true. 38th in healthcare. 32nd in natural environment was a little bit of a surprise. And one of their variables it's actually not their variable. They take, of course, it from a different report. It's done by the EPA. And according to the EPA, New Mexico has relatively low air quality, and so do most Western states, because we have all those forest fires, which I thought was interesting. You think of states that have bad air. Well, you're probably thinking New York, New Jersey, maybe Illinois. Here are the bottom 5 states in air quality: Arizona,
Okay.
California, okay, now LA and the smog, Nevada, New Mexico, Illinois, and Utah. So number 44 is Colorado. And that, so I quibble with that one, but, overall, the economy 44th, fiscal stability because the oil and gas money available is the best ranking we have at 15th, infrastructure 44th, opportunity overall 41st. So I've looked at all of the different inputs into this infrastructure. It has an emphasis on renewable energy, for example. I don't think infrastructure and renewable energy should be things, but internet access, I think that's fair as our road quality. So a few points to quibble about, but overall, New Mexico 47th, right in line with kind of expectations. Number 1, Utah, 2, Washington, 3, Idaho, 4, Nebraska, 5, Minnesota, and then at the very bottom, Louisiana, Alaska, Mississippi, New Mexico, West Virginia. So kind of familiar territory sandwiched right in there between West Virginia and Mississippi.
Yeah, and it does show, Paul, things like that. You go through the list, and as you say, there's a few you could take exception with, but overall, yeah, we've gotten used to that. So when a study comes out, New Mexico does not expect to be at the top of the good list and at the bottom of the bad list the other way around. And it is also interesting to know where was spaceports and rail runners and things like that in there, or film subsidies. That doesn't necessarily do a whole lot for making a state successful, and those seem to be the sorts of initiatives that we've done here in our state.
Yeah, no doubt. So free money. Speaking of another policy like that, free money is popular. I know this is a breaking news flash.
You heard it here.
What I'm specifically referring to is the Albuquerque Journal covered a solar subsidy program offered by the state of New Mexico. And as it turns out, the state has $12 million in solar subsidies that it hands out to people who put them on their roofs. The interesting thing is that they wind up being all used up by the end of March in a typical year. The headline of the Journal article is "Limit on Solar Tax Credit Mars State Program," as if the only possible problem with handing out subsidies for solar panels, and this is just one of many because, of course, the federal government has its own, is that cap at $12 million annually is, too small, and so people lose out. And, you do feel somewhat bad for people who are expecting to get this 10% tax credit and wind up not getting anything because they maybe didn't apply or have the opportunity to try to get the subsidy until June, July, August, whenever the subsidy's been over with. And of course, the implication of the article in the Journal and kind of, you can imagine the environmental groups are saying, well, all we need to do is just, $12 million is consumed by March. Let's do $48 million. And of course, right now with oil and gas money flowing in, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see the state of New Mexico engage in additional subsidies. But yeah, free money. It's popular when you're handing it out, and whether solar panels make a big difference in our energy issues and supplies is a very different question. But they didn't quote any critics of the program in the Journal article, unfortunately, which is all
because there weren't any, Paul.
No, you couldn't find them.
Couldn't find one. Rio Grande Foundation. Oh, I wonder who might have said something. They just at least asked the question, heaven forbid.
Right.
Yeah, Paul, free money with little or no strings attached will always scale to the amount of money in the pot. It's just the case. It's like, what if we were to say, oh, this gas station is going to be selling gasoline for $1 a gallon? Guess how many people would line up? They'd line up until all the gasoline was gone. And so, yeah, it's not a surprise that happens. And then why 10%? Why not 20% subsidy? Why not $1 million? Why not every bit of this money in the state go to this? Why not the whole oil and gas permanent fund for solar? And the key is that's the other thing is when you have incentives that aren't necessarily in line with economics, guess what? You get a lot of uneconomic activity sometimes, and that is also a possibility. So yes, don't do any of those things I said. That was totally in jest, but yeah, that is an issue we have, and yes, that is not breaking news that people like free money. They definitely do.
Yeah, and not to further point out the hypocrisy of the left in New Mexico, a Stanford report from November of 2022 says tax rebates for solar power are ineffective for low-income Americans. In other words, this is yet another regressive policy. Take from the poor and give to the rich that our politicians in New Mexico and environmental groups, et cetera, embark on. But they don't get criticized, don't get called out. There's no discussion. It is the wealthier who can afford the solar panels, and quite frankly, the wealthier who can afford them, whether they get the 10% subsidy or not. So, folks who miss out on that 10%, I don't feel. I'm not crying any tears at night for them because they can still afford those panels. That's just something that you have to make. You're making those decisions based on overall affordability for yourself and your family, not whether you're getting that extra 10% boost.
Yeah, and then Paul, if you're a renter, if you're in a situation where the feeder is at capacity, P&M will not, hook you up to the system and get the benefits you have that way. So yes, it's amazing how a lot of that does impact the poor. And again, maybe there's a second article to come out of the Albuquerque Journal. There's a couple topics they could talk about.
Oh, we would love to see that. But speaking of policies that disconnect the average person versus the political classes, New Mexico's congressional delegation, just days after it was rejected outright, any buffer zone around Chaco Canyon monument was rejected by the Navajo Nation. Our congressional delegation, all five of them, reintroduced a proposal for a 10-mile buffer zone. So that means you take the existing park and everything within 10 miles is off limits to energy development and basically a wide variety of other development. Really interesting stuff here because, again, this is the radical environmentalists and our congressional delegation, but I repeat myself, that they are acting in opposition to the people who own the mineral leases and, a poor, obviously, what they call intersectional group, Native Americans and Navajo, who want to try to generate some money. $194 million specifically over the next 20 years is the estimate if they were to lose those mineral rights. Interesting stuff here because I think the Navajo elected officials, if you got them in a room, would probably be happy to put a mile or two buffer around. I mean, you're talking for every foot that you have under existing control of the federal government, 10 miles going around that. So it's a massive, massive area. And I just think the Navajo said, no, we might take a small buffer, but 10 miles is too much. We're going to lose too much money, and our opportunity cost is way too high. So you have the congressional delegation and the media pushing for a big buffer, and the Navajo Nation, who's actually impacted, pushing for no buffer now.
Yeah, and Paul, I know more about that issue than I ever cared to. I worked on it earlier in my career, and what's interesting is you don't see many pictures about what the devastation that the current lack of buffer is bringing, and you know why that is? Because you have the way Chaco sits and the way development happens. Most of it isn't right there. next to Chaco Canyon. It's quite a bit away. And there are some existing wells that are right up against the boundary, but you cannot even see them from the monument. You can't even see them from the road. And it's one of these issues that it sounds really good. Oh my goodness, we have this historic site, and they're out there destroying it. And based on driving out there many times and taking a look at what's going on, that just is not the case. And so we have the question of who are the constituents. They're certainly not the Navajo of our congressional delegation. They certainly don't appear to be the Navajo citizens who are owners of what are called the lawtees. They're lawtees. They actually have private property rights for oil and gas development. It must be somebody else, maybe the Sierra Club of the Greater United States or somebody else. But it is interesting to see them so opposed to what the local, the Navajos who actually live out there want at this point.
Yeah, and some of the more radical environmental groups will imply in their messaging on the issue that drilling is happening or scheduled to happen within the Chaco Monument. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is all on the periphery and outside of it, and what that buffer looks like, if there is a buffer at all, is very much up for debate, and some interesting kind of dynamics there. And you can bet that if somehow the situation were reversed, that, say, the conservative policy was being pushed by a bunch of politicians, contrary to the interests of tribal authorities and the tribal elected officials, that there would be a lot more of a firestorm and a lot more concern expressed in the media, et cetera. But they generally toe the line for the enviros and especially our delegation.
No doubt about that, Paul.
Speaking of energy-related issues, New York has passed a ban on gas stoves for new residential buildings. This got quite a bit of attention. And, the interesting thing, Wally, I don't have cable. I don't have cable television. And somebody put together a video of all of these talking heads, presumably on the MSNBCs and CNNs, but, kind of the left-leaning cable networks, arguing or showing that, this gas issue, banning gas, wasn't a real thing. And now New York has gone and done it, becoming the first state to place an outright ban on gas stoves. But the idea that this hinged on New York and whether New York was going to do something, or the Biden administration, because they're seriously talking about it. We just talked, I believe, last week about Berkeley having their local ban overturned, and they're one of, I think, 100 or 200 cities in local governments that have embraced some kind of ban, not to mention Senator Heinrich, who very much shares the thoughts and views of the Biden administration. And he's been on this particular issue very aggressively. So the idea that this was somehow a vast right-wing conspiracy or a cultural war issue, which I don't even understand that one, but here we are.
If it's a culture war, I'm not sure what the sides are. So
we're fighting the culture war of cooking decent food. So anyway, the fact is that this has been passed in the state of New York. Based on the decision out of the Ninth Circuit overturning Berkeley's ban, New York is going to face some challenges with this law and making it stick. But they're in a different circuit, obviously, California and New York. This would be a decision. I think it's a slam dunk if it made its way to the Supreme Court. I think it would be overturned with 6 votes comfortably, and maybe even 1 or 2 of the liberals on the Supreme Court. But that process takes time. So anyway, big news there again on the natural gas in buildings front.
Yeah, and boy, this of all the things that I would have expected to become a tempest of public policy, that natural gas stoves was pretty far down the list. But yep, there we have it, and it is one of those things that anything that's not electricity seems to be tends to be a target at this point. And, we've got to be careful, so we're going to go all electric cars, all electric cooking. Then we can easily outlaw natural gas for heat and go all electric heat. That combined with an electric system that is not up to the challenge, a lot of times, even under the current requirements, and we're asking for trouble. So there's a lot. This is not the end of this story. I think we're going to be talking about issues like this for a decade or more.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch as things develop on this particular issue out of New York, and whether other states in that region, there's plenty of liberal states up in New England and whatnot. We'll just see where it goes. But in line with that effort, Michelle Lujan Grisham was named this week to the U.S. Climate Alliance Executive Committee. She joins, or is named with, Jay Inslee, one of the most radical environmental governors in the country up in Washington State, Governor Janet Mills from Maine, Hochul, of course, from New York, who pushed through the gas ban, and Gavin Newsom. So these are really Michelle Lujan Grisham's BFFs. The governor from Oregon that she did so much in line with her on COVID, Kate Brown, no longer is in the governor's mansion, but certainly old Gavin and Kathy Hochul, New York and California, are the guideposts for Michelle Lujan Grisham. And, it's just notable. Yeah, California is kind of an oil and gas state in terms of production. They're still pretty high up on the list, but nowhere near the percentage of their overall economy. And none of these other states are significant producers of oil and gas. And in fact, in addition to natural gas stove ban, New York has a fracking ban on the book. So New York's a real outlier there among U.S. states. But just another way that our governor is working to undermine our state, doing nothing to benefit our state, and really working with a group that has nefarious ideas at their very heart.
Yeah, and it is interesting, Paul, is that a lot of these policies individually are not necessarily enough to bring the house of cards down around you, but the way this is being done, the cumulative effect is going to get to the point where, hey, believe me, people are going to notice. Unless there be any doubt, let's look at California, with all the problems they've had with their electric system under the existing circumstances, much less what's going on in the future. Oh, yeah, and by the way, are California electric rates higher than they are in New Mexico or lower? And the answer is they're much higher. And so the price element of this is also huge. And so the people that are doing this, it does not seem like, it seems like they have a plan, they have a vision, and they don't have a constituency other than the environmental groups and each other. It does not seem like they take into account very much what it means for their citizens. And we'll see if there's anything that comes of this. Governor Lujan Grisham vetoed a few extreme environmental measures, and maybe because she's on this committee now, she'll have to go back and pass these next time. We'll have to wait and see on that as well.
Exactly. So now on to a different episode involving our governor. In her first speech publicly since the signing deadline on her legislation, Lujan Grisham spoke to the Albuquerque Chamber. A primary area of interest for her was the hydrogen hub. I'm sure she wanted to kind of emphasize something that she at least perceives as being a pro-business policy. We at the Rio Grande Foundation see something that's so heavily reliant on federal subsidies and so kind of questionable in terms of the science as not necessarily, a good way for New Mexico to improve its overall economic situation. But if you are interested in finding out more about the hydrogen issue, I can commend folks to a couple of podcasts that we had in 440 and 438. George Sharp in 438 advocates the pro-hydrogen position. Larry Scott, representative and oil and gas man, 440, the negatives. And George Sharp works with Marion Oil and Gas up in the Farmington region. So, we won't get into the ins and outs of hydrogen and whether that's beneficial, but actually, one of the more interesting things that Lujan Grisham discussed in her chamber talk was that she wants to create the largest statewide tutoring program per capita in the country. And I'm kind of agnostic about this. She didn't outline many details, as tends to be the case in a big speech. You're not going to get a lot of details on exactly what it'll look like, but I am at least agnostic on the idea of a tutoring program. It sounds like you could do a lot of that with relatively minimal government involvement. Sure, they're going to pay the bills, but tutoring by definition almost seems to be outside of the government school hierarchy and system. Obviously, it's on top of $15,000 a kid we're spending on our K-12 system. Her COVID response did incredible harm to New Mexico students. So there's a lot to unpack there in terms of her kind of admitting that what she's been doing in education over the last 4 or 5 years hasn't gotten the rocket off the launch pad, so to speak. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of details come out on that proposal.
Yeah, because there's a number of factors. I could certainly agree that tutoring could be a fantastic thing. And so, who are these tutors going to be? Are they going to be members of the teachers union? Or are they going to just be, some independent contractors? And then if they're not union teachers, what happens if they start showing success and we have to allocate more resources to the tutoring program because that's what's really working?
Yeah.
Not the government controlled schools. So this is not a risk-free political thing, but there's no doubt. Look at New Mexico's educational attainment numbers, and something needs to be done. And so hopefully this will get off the ground, and this will be the thing that will move the state forward from our education point of view.
Yeah, more details hopefully to come. Also related tangentially to the governor is Senator Heinrich has announced his reelection bid for Senate. Not unexpected, although we all expect that Heinrich will run for governor in 2 years. So maybe flipping places with Lujan Grisham. We just don't know. Of course, he criticized her for the vetoes on those environmental issues. There was a full-page ad taken out in the Albuquerque Journal criticizing the governor for vetoing those ostensibly climate-related subsidies and other giveaways. Whether the Republicans can come up with somebody to run against Heinrich, and whether it makes sense for them to run in this election with a deeply entrenched, well-funded incumbent versus maybe trying to take on, at least she won't be an incumbent, Lujan Grisham, or possibly somebody else running for governor. Certainly the Democrats could put somebody forth, or maybe Lujan Grisham wouldn't want to run for governor or senator, I'm sorry. So we'll see, but I do think all eyes are on the Republican Party to see if they can come up with a credible challenger for Heinrich in this 2024 election.
Yeah, and Paul, one of the things I will say in general that the Republicans have had better candidates than they have for a while for these statewide races and for governor. They aren't winning, but they have had some decent candidates. But you don't have to look back too long ago. There was a time like where the candidates for to oppose Democrat incumbents were just not as of a quality that you ever thought they had any chance of winning. And so, yeah, it will be interesting to see. It's a heavy lift here in New Mexico to run against an incumbent senator who's a Democrat when you are not.
Yeah. So next up, Wallet Hub has a new report out. Uh, it's completely unsurprising to anybody who follows New Mexico politics that we have the number one, uh, unfortunately, drug problem with illegal drugs in the entire nation. Uh, and this isn't an issue that Rio Grande Foundation really focuses on so much. It's a problem. It's, I think, evidence of serious social ills facing our state and challenges. But where I do think it really kind of gets into our broader political and policy discussion here is we just came out of a legislative session in which the legislature itself passed tax increases on alcohol, ostensibly because of our problems with DUI and other alcohol-related deaths. And the fact that we have these alcohol-related problems is more endemic, more of a deeply rooted problem in a lot of cultural and social issues facing our state than it is in mere tax policy that you're going to pass a nickel a drink or dime a drink or 50 cents a drink tax increase, and then that's going to have some kind of positive impact here. The fact is New Mexico's got some deep underlying issues. We're number one in drug abuse and drug use on the illegal front, and it's not going to be improved with taxes on alcohol that we're going to suddenly overcome these problems. So much more complicated than that, than what the legislature was considering. And we're going to be honing in on this issue a little bit in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, and then, in addition to alcohol, we have other legal drugs like marijuana. What role does that play? Marijuana is actually alcohol is kind of fallen out of favor as as what's good for the state of New Mexico. There for a while we legalized the microbrewery industry, and a lot of economic development came out of that. Same with the New Mexico spirits happening, and now that's fallen out of favor, and everything's about marijuana. But then the other thing that we have is there's no you can't regulate or tax illegal drugs because guess what? They're illegal. So that's another huge piece of the puzzle, and that's definitely a law enforcement, not just some sort of tax policy or a rehab program or something else. So it's no doubt a complicated issue, and I'd be interested to hear what some of the ideas for addressing this might be going forward.
Yeah, they're already illegal. So
yeah, it's like what are we going to do there? So
yeah, last story up on the agenda here: Virgin Galactic. Lucy is finally looking like she's putting that football down on the ground.
That doesn't mean it's going to be kicked.
We'll see. So we're approaching the second anniversary of Richard Branson's crewed mission that he was on back in July of 2021. We're, as of this announcement, on May 8th, so just a day ago, the Virgin Galactic people are saying that in late May, they're going to have a crewed mission. Now, at NASA, they would already be doing the countdown. They would have the not only date, but the hour and the, everything would be in line. I love just the fact that, they didn't announce this in like January or December. They announced it in May 8th. And they're like, sometime around late May, we're going to launch this thing.
Yeah, May-ish, late May-ish, Paul.
And, technically we're like
we're
a week from late May. So I have little confidence that they will launch. And this is a 4-person crew of Virgin Galactic employees. The ostensible follow-up mission is coming in late June, which is this is the Italian Air Force launch that they've been like first in line for quite a while to do some experiments and whatnot, and we'll see if that happens. Obviously, a lot depends on what goes on in late May with the Virgin launch. And as usual, our viewpoint is that we hope for the best, not just because we want everybody to survive and return home safely to their families, but because we've sunk a lot of money into this thing as a state. It doesn't mean, even if these two missions are in a timely fashion and they go off well, that the Spaceport America has made a dime's worth of sense for the state of New Mexico taxpayers to put so much money into. But we do hope that the missions are successful and that somehow, some way, this private space tourism actually works. I have my suspicions, though, based on past behavior coming out of Virgin Galactic, that I really think these are make or break missions. They have to be done both safely and in a relatively timely fashion. The company has been just hemorrhaging cash. Their stock price is way, way down, and we're really getting up to make or break time. So I hope that they are making these decisions based on sound engineering principles and not just we got to do this before we run out of money kind of thing.
Yeah. So, Paul, in your Errors of Enchantment post, you used a term flight cadence. And let me just say, so you got to do three things. You have to actually fly, you have to safely fly, and then flight cadence means you have to frequently fly, but cadence is more than just frequently. The airframe itself has to be able to fly a sufficient number of flights in between needing massive downtime for maintenance and repair, or else the space flight as a business will never work. And so we're not even to the actually fly point of view, and maybe we're going to get there in May. But again, certainly not cheering against in this endeavor. But something that's gone on, basically a decade without signs of getting to that third level that's required for it to be a business is certainly concerning at minimum.
Yeah, it is worth noting that, of course, you just launching kind of one-off missions every once in a blue moon is not enough to make this a viable enterprise or to make the spaceport a viable operation. Even if they do succeed, there's very serious questions about what economic impact, if any, this will have on New Mexico from a broader perspective. Just having people fly in, spend the night in a T or C Holiday Inn Express, and then go off for their space mission and come back home. That's not necessarily going to make this expenditure of tax dollars worthwhile. But I mean, yeah, it's one thing to launch missions every once in a while. It's another thing to do what they originally said they wanted to do, which was essentially weekly manned space missions. So a lot to watch there at Spaceport America. And again, best of luck. I hope it all works out. So real quick, we've got a couple of kind of calendar items for folks listening to this show. One is June 14th. That is our second regular luncheon. Judge Glock, who you can go through the Tipping Point archives and find Judge Glock, who works in Austin, Texas for the Cicero Institute. We had a wonderful conversation, very informational about the homeless challenges facing not just our city, but cities across the country and really the entire nation. I think he does the best job of anybody I've ever heard of offering coherent policy solutions for the homeless problem. That's our speaker on June 14th. We are having that at Seasons in Albuquerque and Old Town Albuquerque. So check that out. We will be, just go to riograndefoundation.org. In the next few days, we'll have information on tickets, et cetera, there. Trying a different location. We've had a few co-sponsored events with our friends at the Federalist Society, but just trying a different location. And the Seasons folks have been great so far. The other one is September 22nd. So this is definitely just a calendar item. All day that day, we are having an education conference to talk about and try to get people all across New Mexico engaged together on the same general page. We need to unite all advocates for education reform, whether it's charter schools, whether it's private school choice, whether it's just people who think the existing school system is in dire need of reform, i.e., we've talked about Mississippi and their successes within the traditional school system. What have they done, and what can we do in New Mexico? Private school choice is sweeping the country every week. Our friend Corey DeAngelis is out talking about some new state that's embraced, groundbreaking school choice. And of course, charter schools are the form of choice that we have in New Mexico, and we can and should bring more options to the state that way. So a lot to put on your calendars there. And like I said, we'll have more information on the website very shortly on the June 14th luncheon. I think that'll be really exciting. So
I will be there, Paul.
Excellent. Yes, I figured you might be. So
yeah, no, that's good. And again, to second the judge, that is his first name is Judge. So that's
he's got the best name in public policy.
Yeah, he really does. No, he was a fantastic podcast guest, and I'm really excited to be able to come out and see him in person, because he really did have some ideas that I believe are, one, hopeful, and two, based on what he is advocating for, actually has a bit of success compared to what's being done right now in a lot of places, including New Mexico and Albuquerque.
Yeah, episode 452, Judge Glock, Solutions to Homelessness, November 3rd, 2022. So yeah, I'm really excited, and we'll probably have him back for another go round, because of course there's been a lot going on in homeless policy and other items across our country since November of 2022. But thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.